After his life fell apart, a war veteran returned to his grandfather's dusty old Quonset hut. What he discovered hidden beneath the floor wouldn't just save him, it would change the lives of countless others forever. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we dive in, make sure you join our YouTube family by hitting that subscribe button. Don't forget to like this video and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is. Alright, let's jump straight into the story. Daniel Mercer was 24 years old when his life slowly came undone. It didn't happen in one loud moment. It happened quietly, like screws loosening from a machine that no one was checking anymore. After leaving the military, Daniel believed things would become easier. During service, every day had structure. There were clear orders, clear goals, and clear consequences. When he came home, that structure disappeared. No one told him when to wake up. No one told him what mission to complete. At first, that freedom felt exciting. After a few weeks, it felt heavy. He tried working at a warehouse in the city. The noise of metal crates slamming onto concrete floors made his heart race. He didn't tell anyone why he kept stepping outside to breathe. He told his manager he just needed fresh air. After 2 months, he quit because he couldn't focus. Next, he tried working at a small car repair shop. He thought fixing engines would feel familiar. For a while, it did. But when customers argued loudly about prices, his patience snapped faster than it should have. One afternoon, he shouted back at a man who complained about a delay. The owner pulled Daniel aside later and gently said, "You're a good worker, but you look like you're fighting something inside." Daniel didn't answer. He just packed his toolbox and left. His girlfriend Maya stayed patient for as long as she could. She listened when he had restless nights. She sat beside him when he stared silently at the wall. But Daniel stopped explaining what he felt because he didn't fully understand it himself. One evening she held his hand and said, "I care about you, but I don't know how to reach you anymore." He saw tears in her eyes, and that hurt more than any argument. He didn't try to stop her when she walked away. In his mind, he believed she deserved peace even if it wasn't with him. Within 6 months, Daniel had no steady job, no apartment lease, and no relationship. His savings drained slowly like water leaking from a cracked pipe. When he realized he couldn't afford another month of rent, he loaded his duffel bag into his old pickup truck. There was only one place left that belonged to him. His grandfather's Quonset hut stood on a wide stretch of dry land 2 hours outside the city. The curved metal building had been part workshop, part storage, and part meeting space for as long as Daniel could remember. As a child, he spent summers there learning how to repair tractors, patch fences, and change engine belts. His grandfather used to say, "Metal bends, but it doesn't break easy." People are the same. When Daniel's grandfather passed away 3 years earlier, he left the hut to Daniel in his will. At the time, Daniel had been busy with training and deployments. He never imagined he would need it. Now, driving down the long dirt road toward the field, Daniel felt both embarrassed and relieved. Embarrassed because returning felt like admitting failure. Relieved because at least he had somewhere to stop running. The hut looked smaller than he remembered. The silver metal was faded and streaked with dust. Weeds pushed through cracks near the concrete base. The large sliding door leaned slightly to one side. Daniel stepped out of the truck and stood still for a moment. The air was quiet. No traffic, no city noise, just wind brushing through dry grass. He pulled the old brass key from his pocket. He had kept it on his keychain all these years without thinking. Now it felt heavier. The door groaned when he pushed it open. Inside, the smell of oil and rust wrapped around him. Tools still hung neatly on the walls. A long wooden workbench stretched across one side. A metal cabinet stood in the corner. Dust covered everything, but nothing looked destroyed. Daniel walked slowly across the concrete floor, each step echoing in the curved space. He ran his fingers along the workbench and left a clear line in the dust. "This is temporary," he told himself quietly. He needed a place to think, to reset, to plan his next move. He set his duffel bag down and opened the small side window to let fresh air in. Sunlight entered in a thin beam, cutting across the dim interior. As he searched for something to use as bedding, he opened an old wooden storage chest near the back wall. Inside were folded blankets, a lantern, and a sealed envelope. The envelope had his name written in his grandfather's careful handwriting. For Daniel. His chest tightened. He sat on the floor and opened it slowly. Inside was a short handwritten note. "If you are here, it means life knocked you down. Stay for 7 days. Repair what is broken around you. On the 7th day, look beneath the floor. Trust the process. Daniel read it twice. He didn't believe in dramatic messages or secret treasure. His grandfather had always been practical, so if he wrote this, there had to be a reason. Daniel looked around the dusty hut again. Loose bolts along the curved walls, a cracked window pane, rusted hinges, broken shelves, 7 days of work. For the first time in months, the idea of a clear task felt calming. Instead of asking, "Why did everything fall apart?" he now had a different question. "What can I fix first?" He stood up, picked up a wrench from the wall, and tightened the nearest loose bolt. The metal clicked into place with a solid sound. It was small, but it was something. He didn't know it yet. But this simple decision, to follow the note, instead of walking away, would begin changing his life in ways he never expected. Daniel stood in the center of the hut with the note still in his hand. The words were simple, but they felt direct. Stay for 7 days. Repair what is broken. Then look beneath the floor. He folded the paper carefully and placed it in his pocket. He decided that if he was going to follow the instructions, he would do it properly. Not halfway, not carelessly. The first thing he noticed was the loose metal sheet along the curved wall near the entrance. Wind had bent one edge inward, leaving a thin opening where dust blew inside. He grabbed a ladder from the side and positioned it carefully. As he climbed, he felt his arms shake slightly, not from weakness, but from tension he had been carrying for months. He tightened the bolts one by one. Each turn of the wrench made a sharp metallic sound that echoed across the hut. The noise didn't make him nervous the way city sounds did. This sound had purpose. It meant something was being secured. After finishing the wall panel, he moved to the cracked window. He removed the broken glass pieces slowly so he wouldn't cut his fingers. While working, he remembered how his grandfather used to explain every step before starting a repair. "If you rush, you repeat the job," he would say. Daniel realized that in his own life, he had been rushing decisions, quitting jobs quickly, ending conversations early, walking away before fully trying. By sunset, sweat covered his shirt and his hands were dirty. But when he stepped back, the hut already looked slightly better. The wind no longer pushed through the side wall. The window frame was clean and ready for a new pane. That night, he lit the lantern and sat quietly on the mattress he had placed in the corner. His muscles ached in a steady, honest way. For the first time in weeks, his thoughts were not racing. Physical work had given his mind a narrow focus. There had been no space for regret while holding tools. On the second day, Daniel cleaned the entire floor. He swept layers of dust toward the door and pushed them outside. Beneath the dirt, the concrete surface was solid and smooth. He realized something as he worked. Neglect had not destroyed the hut. It had only covered it. That thought felt personal. He checked the roof supports next. One beam had slight rust damage. He didn't ignore it. Instead, he sanded the rust away and coated the area with protective sealant from an old supply cabinet. He understood that ignoring small damage leads to bigger problems. He had ignored his own stress signs for too long. Short temper, sleepless nights, sudden silence. Each had been a warning beam beginning to rust. On the third day, he repaired the large sliding door. It had been sticking because the track was clogged with dirt and small stones. Once cleaned and oiled, the door moved smoothly again. Daniel pushed it back and forth several times just to feel the difference. A door that once resisted now opened with little effort. He smiled slightly. On the fourth day, he organized the tools. He wiped each wrench, hammer, and screwdriver before hanging them neatly. While doing this, he found an old photograph taped inside a toolbox lid. It showed his grandfather standing beside 3 younger men in military jackets. They were smiling, holding mugs, standing right inside this hut. Daniel studied the photo carefully. He had never seen these men before. Why would his grandfather keep this picture here? On the back of the photo were the words, "Rebuilding together." The phrase stayed in his mind as he continued working. By the 5th day, Daniel noticed a change inside himself. He woke up earlier without forcing himself. Instead of lying on the mattress staring at the ceiling, he planned the next repair in his head. He wasn't thinking about Maya or the warehouse job, or the argument at the repair shop. His focus had shifted from loss to action. On the 6th day, he replaced the cracked window glass. When sunlight poured through clearly for the first time, the entire hut looked brighter. Dust particles floated in golden beams. The space no longer felt abandoned. It felt alive. He realized something important. The hut had not changed on its own. It improved because he showed up every day and did the work. No one ordered him. No one watched him. The effort was his choice. Finally, the seventh day arrived. Daniel stood in the center of the clean hut and looked around. The walls were secured. The roof was reinforced. The door moved easily. Tools were organized. The floor was spotless. He felt a quiet pride. Not loud excitement, but steady satisfaction. Now it was time to follow the final instruction. He walked slowly across the floor, remembering the words. Look beneath the floor. He knelt near the center of the hut and tapped the concrete surface. Solid. He moved toward the back corner.
Near the workbench, tap solid again.
Then he noticed something different near the middle support beam. A wooden panel had been placed over a section of the concrete long ago, blending almost perfectly with the floor. It was subtle enough that he had not seen it before cleaning. He crouched down and ran his fingers along the edges. There was a narrow gap. Carefully, he slid a flat tool under the side and lifted. The wooden panel came up with effort, revealing a hidden compartment carved into the concrete foundation. Inside rested a small sealed metal box. Daniel's heartbeat quickened, not from fear but from anticipation. He lifted the box out and placed it on the workbench. It was heavier than he expected. There was no lock, just a tight latch. He hesitated for a moment. Whatever was inside had been waiting for years. Then he opened it. Inside was not money, not gold, not property papers. Instead, there was an old audio recorder, several envelopes, and a folded blueprint of the hut. Daniel stared at the recorder, confused. Why would his grandfather hide this? He picked it up slowly. Dust covered the surface, but it was intact. There was a single label attached. Press play when you are ready to understand. Daniel took a deep breath. For 7 days, he had repaired metal, glass, bolts, and beams. Now, he sensed he was about to uncover something far more important than a hidden treasure. He pressed the play button. The recorder clicked. A familiar voice filled the quiet space. Daniel, if you are hearing this, you chose to stay. Daniel froze. It was his grandfather, and whatever came next would explain why everything had led him back to this hut. The old recorder crackled for a second, before his grandfather's voice became clear. Daniel, if you are hearing this, you chose to stay. That means you did not run. I hoped you wouldn't. Daniel sat down slowly on the wooden stool beside the workbench. His hands felt cold even though the air was warm. I built this place after my own service, the voice continued. Not because I loved metal walls, but because I needed somewhere to rebuild myself. War doesn't always end when you come home. Sometimes it follows quietly. Daniel swallowed. His grandfather had never spoken much about his time in uniform. He always kept those stories short and simple. Hearing this now felt different. I learned something important, the recording went on. Broken men don't fix themselves alone. That is why this hut was never just a workshop. It was a meeting place. Daniel's eyes moved to the old photograph he had found. The 3 young men standing beside his grandfather, rebuilding together. In the envelopes inside this box, the voice said, you will find letters from the men in that photograph. We made a promise. If one of our grandsons ever came here feeling lost, the others would help. Daniel's heart pounded harder.
Help.
How? The recording continued. You might think you failed if you ended up here. But ending up here means you are ready to start again. On the back of the blueprint, there are 3 addresses. Go to them, take the letters. Listen before you speak. The tape clicked softly and ended. Silence filled the hut. Daniel stared at the recorder for several seconds. His grandfather had planned this. Not a treasure hunt, not a secret fortune, a network. He opened the metal box again and pulled out the envelopes. Each one had a different name written neatly in ink. Inside each envelope was a letter addressed to someone named If You Are Daniel. He opened the first one. The letter was short. If you are reading this, your grandfather trusted you. I owe him my life. If you need guidance, come see me. I live at the address written below. Do not call first. Just come. Daniel flipped the blueprint over. 3 addresses were written in small handwriting. They were all within driving distance. For a moment, doubt tried to push in. What if these men were gone? What if this was pointless? But then he remembered the 7 days. He had followed instructions and seen change. This was the next step. He packed the letters into his jacket pocket and locked the hut behind him. The first address led him to a small auto garage in a quiet town. The sign outside read Harris Repair. Daniel parked his truck and stepped inside. An older man with gray hair was working under a lifted car. Daniel cleared his throat. The man slid out from beneath the vehicle and wiped his hands. His eyes were sharp and observant. Can I help you? He asked calmly. Daniel handed him the letter without speaking. The man read the front of the envelope. His expression changed slightly. He opened it and read the note inside. "You're Daniel," he said quietly. Daniel nodded. The man studied him for a moment, then gestured toward a chair. "Sit." They talked for over an hour. The man, Mr. Harris, explained that he and Daniel's grandfather had served together years ago. After returning home, they struggled in different ways. Some drank too much. Some stayed silent. Some pushed everyone away. "We made a rule," Mr. Harris said. "No one rebuilds alone." Daniel listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. For once, he allowed someone else to speak fully. Before Daniel left, Mr. Harris handed him a small notebook. "Write what you fix," he said. "Not just outside. Inside, too. Name the problem. Name the action. Name the result." Daniel drove to the second address the next day. It belonged to a woman named Elena Martinez. She ran a small community garden on the edge of town. When Daniel gave her the letter, she smiled softly. "Your grandfather helped me start this place," she said. "He taught me patience. Plants do not grow because you shout at them." Daniel spent the afternoon helping her repair a broken irrigation line. She showed him how water must flow evenly, not too much, not too little. "Balance," she explained. "Too much pressure bursts the pipe. Too little leaves everything dry." Daniel understood the lesson. His anger had been too much pressure. His silence had been too little communication. The third address belonged to a retired school principal named Thomas Reed. His house was simple but well kept. After reading the letter, Mr. Reed invited Daniel inside. "We focused on skills," Mr. Reed explained. "But your grandfather believed character matters more than talent." He asked Daniel direct questions. "Why did you quit your jobs? Why did you let your relationship end without fighting for it? What are you afraid of?" Daniel answered honestly. He admitted he felt useless without orders. He admitted loud conflict made him shut down or explode. He admitted he thought leaving was easier than disappointing people. Mr. Reed nodded. "Awareness is the first repair," he said. Over the next few days, Daniel visited each of them again, not because he was told to, but because he wanted to. They gave him practical advice. Mr. Harris taught him how to manage stress. During tense moments at work, Elena showed him how to slow his breathing and focus when overwhelmed. Mr. Reed helped him practice conversations instead of avoiding them. Daniel began writing in the notebook every night. Problem: I avoid conflict. Action: practice calm response. Result: conversation lasted without anger. He noticed patterns. When he named a weakness clearly, it felt smaller. When he took action, it felt manageable. One evening, back at the hut, Daniel stood in the center of the now restored space. He realized something powerful. The hut had not been hiding money. It had been hiding connection. His grandfather knew that isolation was the real danger. But just as Daniel felt hope building, a new challenge appeared. He received a letter in the mail from the bank. The land where the hut stood had unpaid property taxes from the last 2 years. If he didn't pay within 30 days, the property would be seized. Daniel's chest tightened. He had very little money left. For a brief second, the old feeling returned, the urge to give up. But this time was different. He didn't ignore the problem. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Problem: debt on property. Action: ask for guidance. Create plan. Result: pending." Instead of driving away, Daniel picked up his phone and called Mr. Harris. "I need help," he said clearly. There was a pause. Then Mr. Harris replied, "Good. That means you're learning." Daniel knew this challenge had a purpose. If he solved it alone the old way, he would likely fail. If he used the support system his grandfather created, he might stand a chance. And for the first time since his life fell apart, Daniel did not feel ashamed asking for help. He felt determined. The next morning, Daniel drove back to Mr. Harris's garage with the bank letter, folded neatly in his pocket. He had barely slept, but this time it wasn't because of panic. His mind had been busy planning. Mr. Harris read the notice carefully. "How much?" he asked. Daniel told him the amount. It wasn't impossible, but it was far more than Daniel could manage with what little savings he had left. "You have 30 days, Mr. Harris said. "That's not a deadline. That's a schedule." Daniel liked how that sounded. A schedule felt active. A deadline felt final. Elena joined them later that afternoon when Daniel explained the situation. She leaned against the garage wall, arms folded thoughtfully. "What does the hut offer?" she asked. Daniel frowned slightly. "It's just a building." Mr. Reed, who had also agreed to meet after hearing about the problem, shook his head gently. Nothing is just a building, think. Daniel paused. The hut was large, repaired, clean, and quiet. It was private land. It had tools, workspace, and open surroundings. Suddenly an idea formed. It could be used, Daniel said slowly. Not just for me, for others. Mr. Harris raised an eyebrow. Explain. Daniel took a breath. What if we turn it into a workshop again? Not just fixing machines, teaching skills, basic repairs. Maybe for young people who don't know what to do after school. Elena smiled slightly. And maybe a small weekend market. I could bring extra produce. Others could sell handmade items. Mr. Reed nodded. A community rebuild space. Daniel felt energy rising inside him. This idea wasn't about asking for money. It was about creating value. But there was a problem. I don't have the tools for classes, Daniel admitted. And I've never run something like that. That's why we exist, Mr. Harris replied firmly. No one rebuilds alone. Over the next week, they worked with clear steps. First, they calculated how much money Daniel needed to cover the taxes. Then they broke it into smaller goals. If the hut hosted 2 weekend workshops and a small community event, and if enough people attended, it could raise a good portion of the amount. Daniel printed simple flyers at the local library. Free basic repair workshop, learn to fix what's broken. He added a small fee for materials, explaining clearly where the money would go. Transparency mattered. At first, he felt nervous posting the flyers on notice boards. What if no one came? What if people thought it was foolish? But instead of letting fear control him, he followed the system he had learned. Problem, fear of failure. Action, focus on preparation. Result, confidence increased. The first workshop day arrived faster than he expected. 5 teenagers showed up. 2 of them looked bored. One seemed forced by his parent. Another was curious but quiet. Daniel's hands felt slightly shaky as he began. He remembered how he used to freeze during stressful moments. So he paused. He breathed slowly, just like Elena had taught him. Then he started simple. He showed them how to tighten loose bolts properly. He explained why tools should be handled carefully. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. As the session continued, the teenagers became more engaged. One of them successfully repaired a broken lawnmower handle. Another fixed a small engine belt. Daniel watched their faces change from doubt to pride. He recognized that expression. It was the same feeling he had when he tightened the first loose bolt on the hut wall. At the end of the workshop, one of the boys stayed behind. "Sir," he said quietly, "my dad used to fix things. I want to learn too." Daniel felt something shift inside him. For months, he had felt like he had nothing to offer. Now he saw proof that he could guide someone else. The small fees from the workshop were not enough to cover everything, but they were a start. The next weekend, more people came. Word had spread. Elena set up a table with vegetables and homemade jam. Mr. Harris demonstrated engine maintenance. Mr. Reed spoke about planning goals and staying disciplined. The hut filled with conversation and laughter. It no longer felt like a lonely building in a dry field. It felt alive. Daniel worked harder than he had in years, but this time the exhaustion felt meaningful. By the end of the second weekend, they counted the collected funds carefully. It wasn't the full amount. Daniel's chest tightened for a second. Then Mr. Harris reached into his pocket and placed an envelope on the table. "This isn't charity," he said. "It's investment. You're building something real." Elena added a smaller envelope. "Consider it advance payment for future workshops." Mr. Reed nodded. "Leadership is responsibility. You've shown it." Daniel stared at the envelopes. His first instinct was to refuse. Pride tried to rise again. But he remembered the promise. No one rebuilds alone. He accepted the help with steady hands. When he paid the property taxes at the bank, the clerk stamped the receipt firmly. The land was secure. As Daniel drove back to the hut that evening, the sunset painted the curved metal walls gold. He parked and stepped out slowly. He realized something important. The real threat had never been losing the land. It had been losing direction. Inside the hut, he opened his notebook again. Problem: life collapsed after service. Action: follow process. Accept help. Create purpose. Result: rebuilding in progress. He closed the notebook and looked around. This place had started as a backup plan. Now it was becoming a mission. But Daniel still didn't fully understand one thing. Why had his grandfather been so certain that Daniel would come here one day? The answer to that question was waiting in the final envelope still inside the metal box, and opening it would reveal a truth Daniel never saw coming. Daniel stood in the center of the Quonset hut, holding the final unopened envelope. The metal walls were quiet. The air felt different, heavier somehow, as if the building itself was waiting. He had saved this envelope for last because it had no name written on it. Just one sentence. When you are ready. He hadn't felt ready before. But now, after saving the land, building workshops, and accepting help without shame, something inside him had changed. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single letter written in his grandfather's handwriting. Daniel, if you're reading this, you did more than survive. You built something. That means you understand the real reason I brought you here as a child. Daniel frowned slightly. He remembered visiting the hut when he was young. His grandfather would let him hold tools, measure wood, sweep the floor. At the time, it had felt like small chores. The letter continued. You think you chose this place, but I prepared you for it years ago. I saw something in you even when you were 10. You always stayed behind to help others fix what they broke. You hated seeing things unfinished. Daniel's throat tightened. I also knew that your father struggled after service. He never accepted help. He believed strength meant silence. I could not change him, but I hoped I could guide you. Daniel sat down slowly. His father had rarely spoken about his own military years. He had kept distance from everyone, including Daniel. Now pieces began to connect. The letter went on. This hut was never meant to be yours alone. It was meant to become a bridge. If you are reading this, you have already met Harris, Elena, and Reed. They agreed long ago to help the next generation avoid our mistakes. Daniel realized something powerful. This was not luck. This was legacy. His grandfather hadn't just left him land. He had left him a system designed to prevent isolation from destroying another life. At the bottom of the letter was one final instruction. In the floor beneath the center workbench there is a sealed container. Open it only after you understand why this place exists. Daniel looked toward the workbench. He had repaired that area himself weeks ago. He hadn't noticed anything unusual. He grabbed a screwdriver and removed the wooden panel beneath the bench. After lifting it, he found a small sealed metal case hidden in the ground. His heart pounded as he pulled it out. Inside was not money, not gold, not property deeds. It was a list, a long list of names. Each name had a small note beside it. Struggling after discharge. Lost job. Divorce. Isolation. Daniel stared at the pages. These were veterans in nearby towns. At the bottom of the list was a short message. They will not ask for help. You must invite them. Daniel felt a deep understanding settle inside him. The workshops were only the beginning. The real purpose of the hut was bigger. It was meant to become a place where veterans who felt lost could reconnect, learn skills, and rebuild confidence before their lives collapsed completely. That was the unique twist. His grandfather had designed a quiet prevention system years before. Daniel's life even fell apart. Daniel sat back against the curved metal wall and let the truth sink in. His own breakdown had been the trigger. But this mission was not only about him, it was about breaking a cycle. The next day, Daniel called the 3 mentors and showed them the list. Mr. Harris studied it silently. He never told us about this part, he admitted. Elena nodded slowly. He must have wanted you to discover it yourself. Mr. Reed looked directly at Daniel. This is responsibility at another level. Are you ready? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He thought about the fear he used to feel, the anger, the shame, the loneliness. Then he thought about the teenagers at the workshop. The small smiles when they fixed something with their own hands. He thought about the way asking for help had changed him instead of weakening him. Yes, he said firmly. I'm ready. They made a plan. Instead of calling the names directly and making them uncomfortable, Daniel decided to host a skill and support day at the hut. No pressure, no labels. Just an open invitation for veterans and their families to come learn practical skills, share food, and talk if they wanted. He personally delivered invitations to each address on the list. He didn't force conversation. He simply said, My grandfather built something that helped me. You're welcome to see it. Some men closed the door quickly. Some nodded politely. A few looked suspicious. But Daniel understood something now. You cannot control who shows up. You can only open the door. The day of the event arrived. At first, only 2 veterans came. Daniel greeted them calmly and showed them around. He demonstrated a simple engine repair. Mr. Harris handled another station. Elena set up food outside. Mr. Reed created a small corner for quiet conversations. Slowly, more people arrived. By afternoon, nearly 12 veterans stood inside the hut. No one talked about trauma directly. No one was forced to share stories. They worked with tools. They built small wooden shelves. They repaired broken chairs. Something subtle happened. Men who had avoided eye contact began asking each other small questions. What unit were you in? How long ago did you serve? The conversations were simple, but they were bridges. Daniel moved through the space carefully. He didn't act like a hero. He acted like a host. Late in the day, one older veteran stayed behind. I haven't left my house much in months, the man admitted quietly. Today was the first time I felt useful again. Daniel felt a deep wave of understanding. This was it. This was why the hut existed. Not for profit, not for property, for prevention. That night, after everyone left, Daniel stood outside under the stars. The desert air was cool. The curved roof of the hut reflected faint moonlight. His life had fallen apart months ago. He had thought that was the end of his direction. But now he saw it differently. His collapse had led him exactly where he was meant to stand. He opened his notebook one last time and wrote, Problem, generational silence. Action, build open space for rebuilding. Result, cycle interrupted. Daniel looked toward the horizon. Everything had changed. Not because he found money. Not because he was rescued. But because he chose to continue what was quietly started long before him. The Quonset hut was no longer just his grandfather's. It was the beginning of something that would outlive them both. In the weeks that followed, Daniel did not rush to expand the program. He had learned something important from Elena. Growth that happens too fast can break the structure holding it. So instead of advertising everywhere, he focused on consistency. Every Saturday, the hut doors opened at 9 in the morning. The routine was simple. First hour, quiet work. Second hour, shared project. Third hour, optional discussion. No pressure, no speeches. At first, only a small group returned regularly. But those few became steady. They began arriving early. Some brought extra tools. One brought coffee. Another started bringing scrap wood for small builds. Daniel noticed something powerful. When people contribute, they begin to belong. One afternoon, Mr. Reed pulled Daniel aside. You're doing well, he said. But leadership requires structure. If this continues to grow, you'll need something formal. Daniel understood. If he wanted the hut to last beyond his own energy, it needed organization. So he created a simple plan. He registered the space as a small community workshop. Nothing complicated, just enough paperwork to allow donations and partnerships. Mr. Harris helped him connect with a local hardware supplier, who agreed to donate discounted materials. Elena spoke with a nearby school about sending students, who needed hands-on learning opportunities. Daniel wasn't chasing success anymore. He was building stability. One evening, as Daniel cleaned up after a workshop, he noticed a young man standing near the entrance. He looked about 19, nervous, hands in pockets. I saw the sign, the young man said quietly. Is this just for older veterans? Daniel shook his head. It's for anyone who needs to rebuild something. The young man hesitated. I was discharged early. Medical reasons. I feel like I failed. Daniel recognized that tone immediately. He had heard it in his own voice months ago. You didn't fail, Daniel said calmly. You're just in a different chapter. The young man stepped inside. That night, Daniel realized something new. The hut was not only helping older veterans, it was catching younger ones before they completely lost direction. The prevention system was working. A month later, Daniel received an unexpected letter from the city council. They had heard about the workshops. Someone had recommended the program as a model for community reintegration support. They invited Daniel to speak at a local community meeting. At first, fear returned. Public speaking had never been comfortable for him. The idea of standing in front of officials and explaining the project made his chest tighten. But instead of declining, he prepared carefully. He wrote down clear points. Why the hut exists, what problem it addresses, how it prevents isolation, what results they have seen. When the day came, Daniel stood at the podium. His hands were steady. He didn't try to sound impressive. He spoke simply. I didn't start this because I had everything together, he began. I started this because I didn't. And I was lucky enough to have people who refused to let me disappear. The room was quiet. He explained how small skills restore confidence, how shared work rebuilds trust, how prevention costs less than crisis. When he finished, there was no dramatic applause, but several council members nodded thoughtfully. 2 weeks later, the hut received a small community grant. Not a large amount, but enough to improve safety equipment, add more tools, and create a small emergency fund for veterans in urgent need. Daniel stood in the hut holding the approval letter and smiled. He had once feared losing the property because of unpaid taxes. Now the same land was being recognized as valuable to the town. That evening, he opened the metal box one more time. He placed a new document inside. It was a printed plan outlining the future of the workshop, guidelines, contacts, schedules, and a written promise. No one rebuilds alone. He added a blank notebook beneath it. On the first page, he wrote, "For the next generation." Because Daniel understood something now that he hadn't at the beginning. His grandfather's greatest gift was not the hut. It was foresight. He had built a system that would activate only when someone truly needed it. Daniel had once thought his life falling apart was proof that he was weak. Now he saw it as the moment that positioned him exactly where he was meant to stand. One quiet night months later, Daniel locked the hut after another successful workshop. Laughter still echoed faintly in his memory from earlier that day. He looked at the curved metal structure once dusty and forgotten. It no longer felt like a backup plan. It felt like a lighthouse, not shining loudly, but steady, guiding those who were drifting back towards solid ground. Daniel took a deep breath of the cool night air. His life had not magically become easy. He still had difficult days. He still faced doubts, but he no longer faced them alone, and neither did anyone who walked through those doors. He turned off the lights, stepped outside, and locked the hut with calm confidence. The land was secure. The mission was clear. The cycle had been broken, and everything had changed. Not because something was discovered beneath the hut, but because something was built inside it.